How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Marshall Drop. How's today? It's February 13th, 2021, and today we're gonna take a look at this extremely major snowstorm that's gonna impact the Midwest, the Southeast, and as well as the Northeast by bringing over a quarter of an inch of ice possible and over 12 inches of snow in some areas. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather related content. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather related content. So let's begin by first taking a look at the GFS model, and you see that the GFS model is just taking a very broad storm, a very lengthy storm with a lot of snow extending from Maine to the southeast, and this is as a result of the unstable air that's induced by this Arctic ridge that's bringing a lot of northwesterly winds to the United States, bringing down a lot of that Arctic air to interact with that very warm Gulf of Mexico air. And as a result, it's creating a very broad storm that's going to be long lasting for a lot of people because of how broad it is. And this is a major concern because by looking at how lengthy it is, it means that a lot of areas are going to be in the snow for a good long while. The snow might not be the heaviest you've ever seen. The snowfall rates might not be extremely heavy because this storm isn't going to be a powerhouse of a storm. It's going to hover right around 1,000 millibars. However, because the storm is so lengthy in size, that means that it's going to take a long while before a lot of the Midwest, the Northeast, and the Southeast gets out of the snow and ice entirely because just of how lengthy this storm is. So let's begin by first saying look at the GFS model at this point right now, and you see that there's a lot of snow throughout the Northwest Pacific as it pretty much came off the Northwest Pacific, and it was already pretty potent when it came into the United States. And not only that, it's bringing a lot of cold air behind it, and that's going to help set the stage to create a more unstable environment in the United States to develop that snowstorm. And if we continue to move forward, looking at the GFS model, you see that it strengthens a little bit thanks to the increased amount of unstable air as it heads more towards Midwest, where it's going to interact more with that warmer southeast air that's hovering around Texas, Louisiana, and more southeast states. And you see that typically when we see a low pressure move over a mountainous terrain, it usually weakens because a lot of that there's a lot of friction on the ground as a result of the mountains, and that pretty much prevents full complete convergence to occur right around low pressure system by how much friction the mountains are imposing on a low pressure system. However, it seems like there's going to be just so much unstable air in this region that the storm will maintain the strength over the Rocky Mountain ranges. So strength of this storm won't be the problem, and by tomorrow for a lot of the southeast, for a lot of Texas, you guys will be experiencing the first bouts of snow right around northern Texas, extending to Dallas, Oklahoma City, and even portions of the Midwest as far north as Kansas City. And then if we continue on early Monday, the snow continues throughout Dallas, and then it extends further southward, and this snow will go very far south. And it's not very typical you see that in the United States, where we see snow this far south. Of course, there are times where snow could get very far south into Texas. However, the chances of that during each winter seem very low, especially in a lot of areas such as Corpus Christi or Houston, where you could experience some snow from this. And you see that even as far south as Mexico is experiencing a little bit of snow because this jet stream dip is just so pronounced in Texas. And this could be potentially major for you guys because in Texas you're not very used to snow, so you guys don't want to underestimate it. Even if it isn't going to snow a ton in your area, maybe like 3 to 6 inches in one area, but for a lot of Texas, you're under the 6 to 12 inch category, like I'm showing here right now. Based off what both the computer models are saying, I pretty much synthesized their information into this map, and you see that a lot of Texas, especially northern Texas and Oklahoma, is under the 6 to 12 inch category, which is considered a major snowstorm for you guys. And even just south of that, 3 to 6 inches is expected. And then eventually you see that snow continues to advance northward because as this trough continues to move more and more eastward, so does the cold air, and there's going to be a pretty large Bermuda Ridge that's going to dominate the southeast. And as this trough, along with the cold air, moves further to the east, there's going to be it's going to create an unstable environment right around the northeast and Ohio River Valley. And as a result, we're going to see a new band of snow form in this region, and that will create a very long duration event for a lot of the Midwest and the Northeast, thanks to how lengthy this storm is, which is induced by this unstable air, where the cold air is trying to filter in to that very warm Bermuda air, and since the warm air is very light, it's going to be forced upwards by this more dense, colder air. And along with warm air, there's a lot of humidity because the air molecules are constantly moving, which allows the atmosphere to hold a lot more water, because since the air molecules are always moving, there's a lot more space for water vapor to be stored. And as a result, it's going to be a lot of humidity is going to be forced upwards to condense all throughout the northeast in the form of either heavy snow, heavy freezing rain, or rain along the coast. And you see by Tuesday, it should begin right around late Monday for a lot of you guys in the northeast, and then through Tuesday, it should continue to impact Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, and even extending to Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and a lot of the northern New England. While just south of that, I'd say right around the I-95 corridor, this should be a major ice event for you guys. And you might be thinking, well, what's the European model thinking? And for the most part, they're very similar in terms of their forecast. However, there are definitely some key differences regarding the forecast. For one thing, is that I think the European model is a little bit slower than the GFS model, because if we compare the two at 72 hours from now, the low pressure is still centered over Alabama in the European model. Compare that to the GFS, and by 72 hours, the low pressure is already at New England. So it's going to be key to determine the timing of this, because I don't want to give you guys like an exact forecast that this is going to happen on Tuesday, because there's still uncertainty regarding the timing of this storm, and it really all depends on how this jet stream reacts and how strong that jet stream is. And it depends on the unstable air that's going to be located, because when the air is more unstable, there's a lot more movement in the atmosphere. The air parcels are moving a lot more, and that enhances the jet stream winds. And if the jet stream winds are a little bit more pronounced, we're going to see the storm move a little bit faster, which would be the better case scenario, since if it moves faster, then that would mean that there's going to be less time you guys will be under the snowfall. So that would mean that it's going to be that would mean that the threat won't be as major if it moves a little faster. However, at this point, I don't think it's going to move so fast to the point where it won't be a major threat for a lot of Northeast and the Midwest, because it's pretty much inevitable at this point. You guys will experience a major winter storm out of this. It's unlikely to completely go out to sea, or it's unlikely to maybe weaken to the point where it won't be anything major, as at this point it seems likely you guys will experience a major snowstorm or winter storm out of this. However, the speed of this could help out a little bit by limiting the potential impacts, the detrimental impacts that this storm could bring. So that's definitely something we need to keep in watch, to keep track of this, to show you guys a better idea of how the jet stream looks like. Let's take a look at the 500 millibar height and MSLP anomaly, because it gives a good idea of how the jet stream orientation is different between both computer models, and it gives us an idea of what we need to track or keep an eye on over the next several days regarding the jet stream orientation. So let me go to an hour where the European model is able to forecast. So 72 hours now, you see that there's a decent dip in the jet stream. It isn't a huge dip like the one we saw closer to Texas. However, there's still a decent enough dip in the jet stream to allow for a snowstorm to occur along the Northeast and the Midwest. Let's compare this to the European model, and taking a look at the European model, you're going to see that the jet stream dip is a little bit more pronounced. The storm is a little bit slower and 72 hours now, and it's quite interesting. And it seems like the ridge right here is blocking it a little bit from moving like fast to the north, as it's going to be sort of in a little bit of a blocking pattern, I should say, where this ridge is gonna slow it down a little bit, because when a low pressure system takes a turn, it usually slows down a little bit, because there comes a point where the steering during a turn, the steering flow is very I'm trying to find the right word, is very is very uncertain for the low pressure system, I should say, because when a storm takes a turn, that means that it's slightly taking a turn because of a slightly stronger steering flow than the other steering flow. However, it's still very uncertain for the low pressure system of where to go based during a turn. So as a result, I think that's the reason why the European model is a little bit slower, because the ridge is a little bit more dominant, and once it takes that turn up northward, directly up northward, it's a little bit slower in doing that. So it's definitely something interesting, something we need to watch. Typically, the European model is slightly more correct regarding the speed of the storm and winter storms in general. However, the GFS model definitely could be right as well. So it's definitely something we need to keep in mind. And also, not only that, we also need to keep in mind the position of the low pressure system, because while it's certain that we're going to see a major snowstorm through the Northeast and the Midwest and a lot of the Southeast, what becomes uncertain is the exact position of this storm. And while the margin of error is I'd say around 100 miles, either east or west, that 100 miles could make a huge difference in what you experience, and even a 20 miles difference in the low pressure tracking can make a major difference in the forecast. If this were 20 miles more to the east, that would mean that there's going to be more likely a snow event closer to the coast, such as the New York City metropolitan area, Boston, and then the ice threat will move further eastward as well to maybe where Virginia Beach and the Delmarva Peninsula get impacted even more than what they're forecasted to experience right now. However, at the same time, if this storm moves only a couple miles to the west, that would mean that the freezing rain threat and the snow threat also shifts to the west, while the more coastal regions, it might be more of a rain threat for you guys, which would definitely be good news for a lot of cities in the Interstate 95 corridor, but not necessarily good news for those further west or on the western edge of this storm. So it really all depends on how this ridge reacts, and we definitely need to keep in watch of how strong this Bermuda Ridge is, because if it's a little stronger, that would mean a track further westward, which would impact maybe more Chicago and a lot of the Midwest, and potentially bring more of an ice threat to Pennsylvania and upstate New York, while the Interstate 95 corridor might be more of a rain threat. And since we're 4 days out from this storm, approximately in the Northeast, and still 3 days out in the Southeast, there's still a decent amount of uncertainty regarding the exact track of this storm. While both the European model and the GFS model in their scenarios are very similar in terms of their snowfall forecasts, any slight differences could make a big difference in terms of what you experience. So, however, the good news is that both the computer models are very similar. So at this point, it seems very certain that this scenario that the European model is forecasting is at least right around the ballpark and what to expect from this storm. However, again, 3 to 4 days out, there still could be some changes which could make drastic differences in the forecast in your area over the next several days. However, I'd say at this point, the chances of a major snowstorm are pretty much starting at this point. And taking a look at the European model forecast, you see a large area of 6 to 12 inches. This extends through the interior Northeast, through Ohio and Kentucky, the Ohio River Valley, the Mississippi River Valley, right around Arkansas. Memphis could be right in the sweet spot of snow, and then northern Louisiana and Texas, where you typically don't experience snow this magnitude, and throughout Oklahoma City and just north of Dallas, again 6 to 12 inches could be forecasted. And the GFS model, if we take a look at that, it's forecasting a very similar scenario where it's forecasting right around a large area of 6 to 12 inches throughout the United States. And this snowstorm could be quite could bring the United could cover the United States with 60% of the United States in snow, which is just insane, the magnitude of this storm. And it's really also goes to show the magnitude that this February has been, where we just been seeing snowstorm after snowstorm throughout the United States. So as a result, this could make the United States 60% under accumulating snowfall, which is just quite insane. And you see a large area of 6 to 12 inches. The GFS is a little bit more lenient on bringing the snow further eastward in the southeast, while for in the northeast it's mostly the same at this point. And you see throughout throughout the southeast, again, a large area of 6 to 12 inches. So the good news is that they're very similar in their forecasts, and as a result, I could give this forecast with a little bit more confidence. But again, any couple mile difference between forecasts can make a major difference. So you need to stay tuned to your local forecasts over the next several days, because it will be key, and this could potentially be major, where I'm expecting 6 to 12 inches of snow throughout this large area, as stated by the European and the GFS model, extending to Oklahoma City, Dallas, Little Rock, Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee, Paducah, Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, Cincinnati, and extending to Albany, New York, and even more states up to the northeast, interior northeast more specifically, 3 to 6 inches just south of that. However, I want you to keep in mind how quickly the snowfall accumulation forecast changes on the southern side of this forecast map, where at one point only you're at 6 to 12 inches, but if you only go approximately 50 to 40 miles to the southeast, you're under no snow, or at least an ice threat for a lot of you guys. So any small differences can make a major difference in the forecast, and you need to keep that in mind. And then I think the bigger threat and the more dangerous and deadlier threat could be the ice threat, where over a quarter of an inch of ice is likely throughout a lot of the Northeast, extending through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and even Virginia, and extending to New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. This could be one of the worst ice storms you've seen in years for a lot of the United States, by how impactful it is, by how widespread it is, and by how much ice it's currently forecasted to bring. If you take a look at the National Weather Service ice forecast, you see that the National Weather Service is expecting over a quarter of an inch of ice in a lot of areas. And you might be thinking, well, that's nothing, but a quarter of an inch of ice is completely deadly and very, very dangerous on the roads, and you do not want to underestimate this. And it's to be honest, I'd rather take a quarter of an inch of ice over 10 inches of snow, which is just shows you how bad a quarter of an inch of ice is. And even over a tenth of an inch of ice expected in the blues, and where Houston and Shreveport are involved in this, that could definitely be damaging for a lot of you guys. And extending to the northeast, this extends even further, where Virginia is expecting over a quarter of an inch of ice, and then we even have areas over a half an inch of ice, which is just insanely devastating. And as of right now, New York City and just north of it isn't involved just yet. However, I do expect that to change, especially since this goes until 7 a.m. February 16th, when the storm isn't entirely in the northeast yet. So I'd expect probably over a tenth of an inch of ice around New York City and a lot of Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, which is still very damaging and could cause power outages. So you guys need to keep a close eye on this storm because it could definitely be damaging and one of the worst ice storms you've experienced in years. But yeah, guys, I guess that's it for this video. I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. I hope you guys have a good day.